don't know. Maybe we'll devote the latter 45 minutes to what happened at the Oscars. But this this is the sort of bread and butter that I feel like. Look, we have this new possibilities with the internet and communications technology that that likes to get sold to us as going to be
Mhm.
revolutionary. Let's try to actually put some of the some revolutionary fuel in there, which is it starts with a tweet here, and I saw this. Well, it starts with an email actually, but
Mhm. Old school.
this tweet here, um, put out by Rob Gill, Wayne Pancratz. I mean, very Dickensian name. Sorry, Wayne, but you know, you've really earned this one. Wayne Pancratz of Applebee says that higher gas prices are great for business because most employees live check to check, and hopefully they can start lowering wages. Now, let's just look at a little bit of this email. Or how should we get into this? Should we go through the email first and show how it was received, or
Well, I mean, like we could talk about how it's received. We're going to read a bit from the email in just a second. But
yeah.
as Matt was probably going to note, the thing that's really notable about this email is that the rest of the thread from everyone else who received it, it wasn't condemnation; it was celebration of the brilliant logic coming from Wayne.
Yeah, that's what I want to say. Is so there's a Great Vice News write up. An atrocious email caused a mass resignation at Applebee's. But if we just look at and which is true, like it did cause a mass resignation and it is atrocious stuff. But that glosses over the fact that when you look at how it actually was received by some of the people on the email chain, I mean, the first thing you'll see is "Great message, sir," which
Jesus Christ!
I mean, goodness gracious. And then at the very top, words of wisdom from Wayne. And my eyes are deceiving me. That's either three or four exclamation points. Um, and so, and I'll just read the bottom part of that before we get into it a little bit more. But it starts off the email from Wayne, who's since been fired for saying what he shouldn't have said in writing, what something that should have been left for the after work cocktails. Uh, uh, Team, everyone has heard that gas prices continue to rise. The advantage this has for us is that it will increase application flow and has the potential to lower our average wage. How, you ask? Now, as a leftist, David, your ears must be burning at that sort of phrase.
No, I mean it's pretty tremendous. I mean, if we can pull up those slides here from the email, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened here, and then show how this really vindicates a lot of the writings of that kind of curmudgeonly old communist Karl Marx. But before we get there, I just want to note a couple things, just because the spin machine is running really quickly. This is not just like one local manager of like a small town Applebee's. This is somebody who's an executive in a company that manages in the realm in the neighborhood of around 30 to 40 Applebee's. So this is not some kind
Mm,
of small potato guy. This is somebody who is very, very deeply enmeshed in kind of capitalist thinking and thinking about people's as a kind of means to profit from, instead of the human beings that they are. And rightfully, like most people in the public have been completely outraged. But I think getting into the actual logic that he lays out here is pretty interesting.
yeah.
Um, so this is the first bit from the email here. Most of our employee base and potential employee base, this is a very important phrase, we'll get there later,
Mm.
um, lives paycheck to paycheck. Any increase in gas prices cuts into their disposable income. As inflation continues to climb and gas prices continue to go up, that means more hours. Employees will need to work to maintain their current level of living. If we can just keep these going.
Yep.
He's got a, this is somebody who very much is reacting, to potentially higher immiseration of working people. And you should, one, condemn it, but we have to understand what's going on here. We all competed to hire out the limited applicant pool, and there was a wage war, he wrote. We all saw businesses hiring team members at $18 to $20 an hour. They will no longer be able to afford to do this. And again, we'll get back to these threads later in the show, in this segment. But this is really important too, how like these big firms are able to sort of use their power and undermine these smaller mom and pop businesses. And this is an excerpt from the last bit, his "What is to be done" section. What can you do? Besides hiring employees in at a lower wage to decrease our labor when able, make sure you have a pulse on the morale of your employees. Many will need to work more hours or get a second job. Um, it's extremely cynical to hit at that, basically saying that I think people's lives are going to get worse, so we're going to cut their wages and expect them to work longer hours. But two, that kind of new age American, false sweetness that you get from the boss class these days, where I'm going to screw these people over, but you know what? I'm going to be very, very sympathetic to their everyday struggle.
I mean, yeah, that goes back a long way of like condescending to actually think about caring when people are really just something you want to take from. Like
No, for sure.
half of
And
your
like,
workforce is an easier exploited one.
and luckily, and it's a very good story in the sense that the people who he was directly talking about revolted to this, as is laid out in this Vice piece. There were mass resignations at a lot of the locations that this guy, is supervising. One of the people, Holcomb, who's 23 years old, noted that he gave everyone in the restaurant their food for free. We didn't even close the store, and then Holcomb, along with other people, left and quit their job at Applebee's. He also, rightfully so, printed out this email and distributed it to other employees and to patrons of the Applebee's location that he was at. Um, four out of six of four out of six managers and at least 10 other workers quit on the spot or handed in their notices after this happened. And now this is the important bit, because Applebee's, the corporation, which is set up like a lot of these kind of big chains are set up, has a franchising model. They have distanced themselves from these comments, saying that these do not represent the value of Applebee's. But I think it's really notable and important to remember that rather than Wayne's comments being a kind of deviation, he just said the quiet part out loud, that
Yeah.
their profit margin relies on the immiseration of working people.
Yeah, I mean, this is like what all the emphasis of opportunity overshadows, which is the coercion of all of this. The coercion that you cannot sustain yourself unless you are serving a capitalist in one way or the other. And in all of the time that capitalists have had full reign of, say, like, or for like rule, let's put
Hmm.
over like workers, like let's say since like the Civil War, for instance, when they took over part of the mantle from plantation owners, they have not developed anything that allows them to make this work that isn't brutality. So like when you go to a restaurant like Applebee's, which I enjoy, like that sort of food, I'll be honest, I like that level Chili's, anything that level, Ruby Tuesdays, whatever. The problem is you realize that part of that like subsidizing that like meal that you're having a pretty decent okay price on is
Hmm.
the basically like despair of the workforce and the potential workforce, and that doesn't taste so good.
Hmm. No, I mean, for every $1 Long Island iced tea that you can get there, those are wages being directly pulled out of the pockets of working people.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to, take the moment, because obviously this is despicable, and there's been, pretty significant public outrage. I mean, you can go on your local news channels at this point, and they're talking about this episode. But I wanted to take a moment to really break down how this reveals some of the fundamental tensions within capitalism, and why, you have to go beyond just saying that like you want a nicer version of this system, but that you actually want to move into a system that works for working people instead of just for the profit margins of these big corporations. And I want to look toward Marx, because Marx wrote about this a very, very long time ago. This concept, that Taffer, that this guy Applebee's, that your boss, that all these people who profit off of other people's labor understand very, very well. And that concept is the reserve army of labor, which is a very critical part of the capitalist system. One of the arguments that you get from people who support this current system is that the share of income that goes to workers will stay stable. In other words, when the economy does well, we all do well. You don't need to have spent too much time, pouring through the data to understand that that's not the case. And why is that? Um, there are the direct tensions between you and your boss on the shop floor, but there's an entire social level that plays into this dynamic. In fact, not only does capitalism not divvy out the profits fairly, it creates the conditions of immiseration. This is one of the key points that Marx makes. It happens especially very, very early on as capitalism is spreading throughout a society or a country, where you take people who once were able to get water or cut down trees to fuel their homes. The introduction of private property makes things that people could physically do, makes the natural resources that are around them inaccessible to them. It actually creates immiseration, and it's not just an accident. It is actually a key part of this engine. And it's also
It's a
important to
business
note
model.
too. Yeah, no, it's the bit. I mean, it is the business model, right? As you can see here. I mean, he's laying out very clearly. And I also just want to note too that while like that email is absolutely morally odious, while what John Taffer is saying is morally odious, and we should condemn them for that as people, but you have to remember that like the reason they think that way is because this is a key part of the system that they profit from and engage in, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that you should spare your anger to these people on a personal level, but I also think it's really important that you don't delude yourself into thinking that like, oh, if only we had the nice boss instead of the mean guy. If we had if we had Sam instead of Wayne, right? It
Yeah.
would be better. That's not the case. This incident really was that this guy was just stupid enough to put it on an email that somehow got
Yeah.
leaked. So for capitalism to function, it needs to create an immiserated class that will compete with those on the job floor, right? I've told this story before. I know Matt's probably experienced this. Pretty much anyone who's worked in most retail, low wage service industry jobs, you've had the same conversation before. I remember complaining once to a boss at a restaurant I worked at, and they walked me into their office and they showed me a big stack of resumes and told me quite bluntly that if I have a problem, they have plenty of other people that they can bring in who will have no problem working this job. And that is a fundamental reality of capitalism: is that this constant threat of losing your position and this fear that there is 10 people ready to fill in for you, this kind of created disposability of labor, is key in labor discipline on the shop floor, as is this system, because it creates scarcity of opportunity to work for people, right? Capitalists, you think they would want everybody to be working all the time, right? That's not the case. The thing that capitalists fear more than anything in this country is what's called full employment or approaching full employment, where people are able to leave a job and get another job down the road, the next day. And they have worked tirelessly in this country to create a dynamic where that is not the case, because they like to have people who are scared of losing access to income, right? Marx calls
Yeah.
this the reserve army of labor, right? And a couple things before we get into, we'll go to capital action and break some of this down in more depth. But like, it is really important to understand that in the current context too, that the reserve army of labor necessitates these social programs that Taffer was complaining about in the cold open, right? When John Taffer says all these people are getting unemployment at home, they don't want to work. Well, that is an outgrowth of the needs of the capitalist class. Like,
Hmm.
of the needs of the capitalist class, to make sure that there is some level of bare necessity that's meant, so people don't just starve when they're unemployed. You need to maintain them living, and you do that by making sure that they're living the worst quality of life as possible, which is why Taffer and all these conservatives and pro business politicians fight tooth and nail against the welfare system. But it is something that is actually necessary for the system to reproduce itself, so that when people fall out of the labor force, they don't die, but they are immiserated enough that they will take pretty much any opportunity that's given to them.
Yeah.
Entire industries, especially service, rely on that kind of immiseration. And it's also important to note too that the level of people who are in this reserve army, it changes over time. And when that army is smaller, that is typically times when you see things like increased wages, when you see people getting concessions from their bosses, which is why we're seeing this extreme backlash from the capitalist class today, right? And a lot of that happened because to get through to make sure that capitalism didn't crumble during the coronavirus pandemic, the American state got very involved and gave people unemployment and gave people stimulus checks. It was not anywhere near enough, but it was enough that especially people on those, on working those kind of low wage jobs, were more and more confident to start to demand more from their bosses, which is why, as we saw in the email, they were complaining about how they had to increase their wages during that period of time, right? Um, so yeah, stimulus helped a lot of people leave their jobs or demand better pay at their jobs. But with that now drawing up, this capitalist class is really celebrating the return of their ability to be absolute tyrants.
Yeah, and that's why when you hear these articles like the average American doesn't have $400 in case of an emergency. That is the capitalist
Hmm.
class and congratulating themselves on a job well done. And the reason that they donate so much to politicians and have them gum up things like further COVID assistance, say let's slice off that $600 from the $2,000, or not, extend health care in the pandemic, is because of that reason. They want to maintain that sort of cudgel of deprivation that forces you to fucking
Hmm.
go serve French fries.
Let's put up this first quote, if you could, from Capital, because I just want to make this explicit, right? What this guy Wayne is saying, and much less eloquently, is literally what Marx writes about in Capital, Volume One. So this first quote right here just lays it out quite clearly. It is the absolute interest of every capitalist to press a given quantity of labor out of a smaller rather than a greater number of laborers, if the cost is about the same. The latter had bred it at its own cost. And what he's saying there is exactly what Wayne is saying in that email. When Wayne notes that they were having to pay people $18 to $20 an hour, but now because stimulus is drawing up, because there's inflation, and because, most importantly, gas has gone through the roof, um, prices have gone through the roof. They now feel more and more confident in their ability to actually lower people's wages, while also, because people are getting paid less, have them work more hours, right? He says this explicitly. We're going to pay people less and have them work more. Well, so at the end of the day, what is that relationship on a financial level for the capitalists? They're coming out on top, right? They're getting more labor out of somebody for less money. And that is them recognizing the situation, with the reserve army of labor sort of growing, because more and more people are being sort of cast off into these kind of desperate situations, that they can now use that to their advantage. And now we have this longer quote, and it's a bit dense, but we'll break it down. Trust us, because this really explains the internal dynamic of capitalism, and why you can't just expect nice people to develop out of the system, and why you have to push past it. This is again from Capital Volume 1. The overwork of the employed part of the working class swells the ranks of the reserve, whilst conversely, the greater pressure that the latter, by its competition, exerts on the former, forces them to submit to overwork and to subjugation under the dictates of capital. The condemnation of one part of the working class to enforced idleness by the overwork of the other, and the converse, becomes a means of enriching the individual capitalists, and accelerates at the same time the production of the industrial reserve on a scale corresponding with the advance of social accumulation. So, what does that mean here? Uh, the first bit, what Marx is saying, is that when you have a small group of people who are working, and their hours are increased by their capitalist, by their boss, um, their hours are increasing, which means that there's less work time available for other people, right? And that creates a situation which sort of is a puzzle, right? If you think about it, like, just purely logically, why is it that some people are being forced to work 50, 60 hours a week, while other people are struggling to even find a position themselves, right? And it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you understand that for the capitalist, it really works out in their favor, because they're paying somebody less, um, to work more. They're replacing their kind of wage, their wage level that they have to pay, from the profits that are produced by the working people, while also creating a very hungry and immiserated class of people who are willing at the first moment to fill in or step in for anybody who sort of gets pushed out of employment. Um, the last bit of that quote, the condemnation of one part of the working class to enforced idleness, and this is where Marx is so great, because he's explicit, right? This isn't a natural law. This is enforced. This is a human choice, to enforce idleness on people. This is another example of how capitalism is not really a system that really allocates labor and human potential well, because it creates idleness. It's not that people are lazy, it's that this system actually creates conditions that make idleness of a vast majority of people in this country, a large amount of people in this country, necessary to underlie the profits of capitalists, right? And this is not just limited to labor directly, right? This is also when you think about organizations like OPEC, the oil industry, right? We don't have a problem when it comes to oil right now of there not being enough on the planet to go into your vehicle, right? You know, drop the climate change stuff for a second. Just understand this is the dynamic and the contradiction of capital. You have a condition where the people who own those things want to make a resource that is not really scarce so that they can charge more money for it, right? That is them trying to push back against a term that Marx uses called overproduction, right? When you produce so much of a thing that the price falls dramatically on it, right? And so much of capitalism is not about creating abundance, right? It's actually about limiting our productive capacity so that they can sit on their fiefdoms. And they do the exact kind of same thing when it comes to labor, right? This is enforced scarcity of hours. This is enforced low wages for people, and the idleness that you see when people are unable to find work is enforced for the bottom line of capitalism. So it's just like whenever you hear a conservative, or what's the refrain now, like nobody wants to work anymore, you remind them that that is not a personal moral failing of people, but a systemic problem that is created to benefit the few at the very, very top of the system.
Yeah, if their compensation corresponded to like how much work they actually do, maybe some of these people sending around emails about how higher gas prices might actually be good for the application flow. Maybe they should go like clean some restaurants and get off their ass and go do some work in those restaurants to help short staffed places. But no, of course they've graduated above that level, and now they just get to idly talk about how people going hungry is going to be going
Good
to
for
get in
them.
like 10 more applications that week.
And I mean, I just wanted to note, sort of in closing, that it's really great that people stood up as they should. And like one of the
Yes.
things that, like, I'm a not to get sappy, but like I'm always really moved by people who have the bravery to like stand up against this broken system, even at like personal risk, right? So it's great that people stood up and they refused to be treated in this manner. But we have to remember systematically that like until we break this system, those folks who left, they're just moving into the hands of another corporation that's using the exact same logic,
Yeah.
right? What Wayne Packrats wrote is unbelievably immoral. He's celebrating these difficult times that people are facing, but it's not just a personal moral failing, along with like a really fucking stupid thing to write out. Um, he's operating in the system that rewards that kind of cruel logic. And the job of socialists is not just to condemn the effects of capitalism, but to argue for a system that does not rely on this kind of exploitation of workers and the miseration of entire classes of people to create a
Yeah.
reserve army of labor to be used to pit against us. I mean, that's the cruel thing of the reserve army of labor, is that it's trying to pit the working class. We are natural allies with one another against each other, right? And that's the real trick of this all. But socialists, we need to be arguing for a social order that works to the benefits of working people, instead of the fucking bottom line of asshole capitalists like Wayne Packrats and the rest of the people who kept their jobs and are still management, and the Applebee's corporation that are all just trying to wipe their hands clean of this thing, saying that
It's a
like, oh,
great
we didn't
wisdom,
really mean
sir.
that. Yeah,
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's the thing is like I want more leaks like this, and God bless any manager who would get BCC'd on something
yeah.
like that. Like, oh man, that's a great way. I mean, just save it, even if you're not ready to do it now. But if you're privy to information like that, that's a historical document that we need to be saving, I think. And we have another one of those if we're ready to
Yeah.
move on to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some Google Fiber employees actually is for a contractor named BDS. No relation to the boycott, divest, sanction. Voted to unionize in Kansas City, 9-1 vote to join the Alphabet Workers Union, which is part of the Communication Workers of America. And they also got well, Google's participating in some union busting. It turns out, if you can believe it.
Surprising.
And so they followed a certain script that the union was prepared for, and this great little compilation of put together by the union and put out on Twitter, I wanted to share with folks here. There's a few things they're really prepared for. One, the third party of the union saying, like, you want other people to come, another outside agency to come in here, and also the implication that that their jobs will go away if they continue down this road, which shouldn't be allowed. And well, here we can just enjoy this together.
You know, like I said, the purpose of my visit out here is purely informational. When we get to the vote, whichever way you vote, like, we're still working together regardless of how it goes afterwards. Like,
Yeah, that's already been decided.
Yeah, we've already all decided that we want a union. We wouldn't have signed cards if we weren't informed.
So what folks sometimes will tell you that there's three parties involved. There's the employees. That's one party. One party is the company, management, right? And the other party is the union, which you can choose to have represent you or not.
We are the union.
Yeah, we are the union. I mean, we don't need the election. You guys could just recognize the union.
You're absolutely correct. So in the world of what we'll call third party vendors, your company can decide it's no longer a value proposition for them to work in there, right? And they could say, we're not going to do Google Fiber anymore,
Right.
as an example.
So
Are you willing to put that in writing?
Yeah, are you saying that if we unionize, we're going to close?
No, not at all.
It sounds like
No,
you're
it sure
insinuating.
sounds
Yeah.
like that. No. See, I don't know how you heard that. Right?
I heard it. Yeah,
if you unionize, like, it's perfectly within the right of the client, not BDS, to say, well, we're going to go look for another vendor.
Right. But it is illegal to threaten.
I'm not
Action.
threatening anybody. That wasn't
Okay.
a threat. If you perceive that as a threat,
I'm just making sure you're aware.
no, and I understand that.
So what we're asking for here is why we as a collective group decided to go through this process is so that those decisions aren't being made above our heads.
This negotiation will happen whether we're talking to Google or whether you guys are talking to Google.
Bottom line, we would like these negotiations to have more of our input here from the bottom line. If we have to employ representation, we will. I mean, that's why we're all sitting here wearing red meat. We love the product. We love our jobs.
Helping people.
We like helping people, that sort of thing. We're excited for our election. We're excited to be formally recognized, and we appreciate you guys' time.
I mean, I just love how sort of ready they are to jump down the guy's throat. Like, I mean, not that they voted 9-1, so it's not like there was people who needed to like see the power of it. But like, what a message that sends, that like they're ready for basically each card he's going to play, and like, oh no, I wasn't implying that when I mentioned that hypothetical about a business decision. Yeah.
I mean, I also loved the first bit too, where they said we are the union.
Yeah.
When they were trying to make it seem like the union is an outside party, which is like the first thing that these guys go to, is make it seem like the union is some kind of far off outside actor. So I mean, I will just say, like, if God could bless us with as many incompetent union busters like that,
Yes.
we'd be better off.
That's what I was thinking. Like, I feel like they're just like, they've been out of practice, maybe because we're at low levels of unionization historically, that like these guys are just like, they're dusting off scripts from like the 60s. And that like sort of like nuclear fallout from atomic testing back then still on them. And they're like, oh, I guess I can say this. Sure. And like just hired him from central casting and going like, bro, what people will say is this. It's always interesting like that when they throw in phrases like at the end of the day or things like that. Like, it's like, because you realize that if you watch like reality TV, the way people try to fill up time when they are saying nothing or trying to get around like what they're actually without explicitly saying what their intentions are. Very interesting. So yeah, I hope that union busters do not get any more skilled than that.